Looking for a place to speak your truth? This podcast is on an endless pursuit to build through entrepreneurship, empowerment, and creativity. Through thought-provoking content and a fearlessness to dive into untouched topics with an undeniable dedication to highlighting others who are often overlooked. This is Deep Conversations.
Stay tuned for Deep Conversation Podcast.
Welcome to Deep Conversations Podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Ryan Stewart, and today I'm blessed here to have an expert in voting rights, public policy, voter mobilization, and voter engagement. And she's an Alpha Kappa Alpha, Mone Holder. So, Mone, before we start, I would like to start from the beginning with you. Let the viewers know where you're from and how would you say your childhood shaped you?
Sure. So I am originally from Brooklyn, New York, East New York, Star City. Moved to Miami, Florida, right before high school. So, I'm a mix of both a New York girl and a Miami girl.
Okay.
Now I currently live in Jacksonville, Florida. And as you mentioned, I work for Florida Rising. I'm the Chief Advocacy and Political Officer there. My childhood, how it shaped like me or what I do now, it's interesting because as I reflect back, I didn't realize the things that my family had me engaged in as a young child actually prepared me for what I'm doing now. I majored in political science in undergrad. I got my master's in public administration, and I always thought I wanted to be a lawyer. So I did law school for a little bit, but decided that it wasn't for me. But throughout my matriculation in college, because I went to Florida A&M University, I'm a proud Rattler, I interned and worked in the Florida legislature. So working on policy issues, working for members of the House and Senate, working in the House Democratic office. So I knew I wanted to make change. I knew I wanted to work in policy. But then I got a bug to move into like grassroots organizations and doing what I call advocacy from the other side of the aisle. And going back to my childhood, my grandfather ran for office, which I didn't realize until much later in my life. But, he was heavily involved in the union. He was a union leader. We were always going to community meetings. My grandmother always had me passing out flyers in the building about stuff that was happening in our community. So I just thought I was just hanging out like with my family and doing stuff, but not realizing that was my start of, organizing, advocacy, speaking up for the community. So here I am now, and I can't get away from it.
Yeah. So as you said, you're the senior director of advocacy and the programs director. Can you dive into a little bit of what that entails?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit about Florida Rising first. So we are an independent political organization based in Florida, and we're working to build voting and political power in Black and Brown communities across the state. So part of what I do is lead our legislative and policy department as well as research. So anything from local, state, and federal level policy. I work with a team and we come up with either strategies to get proactive legislation introduced and hopefully passed, or to play defense and fight back against legislation that, disproportionately impacts communities of color. We also, in addition to our legislative work, we do voter registration and just civic engagement, simply telling people, what's at stake, what issues they can advocate for in their communities, and then making sure they're registered to vote. And then we have a PAC, which allows us as an organization to endorse candidates up and down the ballot that we think will be best to represent our community. So we have a process in which we engage our community members to say, this person is running for office. We want to support them in the ways that we support them, independent from a party, or the candidate themselves is either like phone banking, knocking on doors, sending out literature, sending out email communication. So people see from a trusted messenger, like an organization like Florida Rising, that we think this candidate would be best. And from there, we continue to hold those candidates accountable, right? Because we know we vote people in, they say a lot of good things when they're on the campaign trail, and then we can't find them anymore. So we're constantly going to them about our issues. This is how we want you to continue to support us, especially if you want us to endorse you again. When they do things that are right, we praise them. When they do things that are wrong, we call them in. So part of my work is managing those departments. And I also serve on our organization's executive leadership team. So all of like the organizational development and partnerships and things like that is what I have my hand in as well.
And that, like I told you off camera, see, you just explaining that you got some skills. But
A
when
little
you were
bit.
talking about the when you were talking about the Black and brown communities, now you're working in, in the programs that you're working in. How can I put it? I guess a lot of us we're always kind of focused on the presidency. But how would you say a lot of us aren't really in tune to how important our local legislative and things are?
Yeah, so one of the things we stress is folks voting up and down the ballot, right? Because you have in a phrase that we always use is all politics are local, right? So oftentimes we find ourselves either mad at the wrong person in government who can fix our problems. And that's part of like voter education and civic engagement too, because there'll be an issue that, you know, you're going to your local city council person and it's really your school board member who can fix the problem. So it starts with educating like who's in charge of what, right? And then paying attention to when their elections are, because you know you have your presidential election year where there's certain people like in Florida, you have your people in the House and Senate locally. And then you have off years where there's other races that are on the ballot. So you have to pay attention to that. But many of the issues that folks have are local. You know, knowing when your local elected officials are having public meetings, how to access their office, how to email them. Those are all important in addition to like a presidential election, because these are the people that interact with you day to day. And oftentimes they're the one who are implementing some of the things that trickle down from the federal level. So it's important not only to know what they do, hold them accountable and build relationships with them and their staff in their offices.
Now, you being in the political field, what's some things that you would say that are politically incorrect when it comes to when it comes to voting?
So when it comes to voting, I don't know, I don't know if I would say it was politically incorrect, but I would tell you one thing that I see a lot when it comes to voting is voter suppression tactics being taken lightly.
Mm.
So, in a place like Florida and many states across the South, we're seeing a lot of attacks on access to the ballot box, especially when it comes to Black and brown communities. We're in a place now where we're seeing like early voting locations that are in predominantly Black communities all of a sudden like disappearing and not being available anymore. In a state like Florida, and this happens across the country where you can have access to early voting, there's disparities on like the days and the hours. And oftentimes our communities just kind of think of it as something that just happens, but it's by design. So how are we pushing to make sure that we have the access we need for election day to vote on those issues and vote on those people? Is something that I think people don't pay enough attention to. And it's the work of like grassroots organizations like Florida Rising to not only educate, but involve people in those processes as well.
So, um, with the upcoming election,
Mhm.
we got some of this going on. Why is voting rights so important?
So I know it sounds cliche, but literally, you know, your vote is your voice, right?
Mhm.
So there's so much at stake as it relates to who represents us and the interests of our community. And when you say voting rights, it's like what I talked about. It's the access piece, right? Um, and what I named is just a few, but when we ensure people have the right to vote, it's it opens up the pathway for us to really make real change, right? So even one issue that I didn't mention, but in a state like Florida, for so long, people who had criminal histories or were considered convicted felons, we call them returning citizens, had their right to vote stripped away. And it was very unique circumstances in which it was restored. So we went through an amendment process in 2018 that was led by an organization called Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, and Florida Rising was a partner there to restore that right to vote to over 1.5 million returning citizens in the state. We got that ballot initiative passed, right, with 60% of the vote. In the following legislative session, they passed the bill that implemented fines and fees. So pretty much, if you didn't pay back fees that you may have owned from like the 80s, you still couldn't have your right to vote. And it wasn't because the state needed the money. It was because they had a fear that out of those 1.5 million people that had their rights restored, number one, a huge chunk of them were Black or Latinx. And they had a fear that once they activated and voted, that they would shift the tide and there wouldn't be Republicans in a trifecta running the House and the Senate and in the governor's office here in Florida. So when you talk about voting rights and why it's important, that's why it's important, because we can have the opportunity to shift the power structure here, not just in the state of Florida, but across the country.
Mm-hmm. Now, for those looking to get into the advocacy space, what are some keys that you could share on how to properly advocate and have a clear call to action?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm gonna say, if you want to get in the advocacy space, thank you, right? Because it
Yeah.
takes and we need more people doing that, because to advocate for yourself, stand up for yourself and stand up for others, that's not easy, right? So I definitely don't take that lightly. I think you have to start with being clear about your issue, clear on how your issue can be solved, and most importantly, have the right target. I talked about that a little bit earlier, like knowing who can fix your problem, because if not, you're advocating to the wrong body of government or to the wrong administration and you feel defeated. I think taking the time to learn the process, especially at the local level and going back up, and know who has the power to change things is super important. You also got to be patient. Advocacy is a long game. And going back to depending on who's in power, right? It will take a long time to not only just shift people who are in office by voting, but also you're if you're trying to do a proactive measure to better your community, it's going to take a long time for something like that to get passed. If you're trying to change a policy that has been hurting our communities traditionally, it's going to take a long time to shift the tide. So it's really, again, just knowing your target, being clear on your issue, being clear on who can solve your problem, and being patient, and building a base of people surrounding you that can help push you forward.
What have you learned about yourself since you got into this field?
What have I learned about myself? I think I learned I'm a lot tougher than I think I am.
Mhm.
You know, when you put yourself in a political environment, first of all, or just in an environment to advocate for people, it's hostile, right? So
Mhm.
often you have to, you put yourself in a position to be beat up, right? And to continue to do that year after year. I've been with the organization Florida Rising for 13 years now. People
Wow.
like still there, and I'm like, I can't leave the work. So I'm a lot more resilient than I initially gave myself credit for. And I learned that I have a passion for change. Like I knew that I always believed in the right thing and helping others, but I really want to see some of the work that I've started. Like I said, it's a long game. I really want to see it through. So I think that's what I've learned.
Yeah. You you being the vice president and a member of the board of directors for Friends in Need Children's Center and a
Yes.
board member for Read USA. What are some of your goals moving forward with what you want for the children?
Yes. So children are important, obviously, because they're the next generation of
Hmm.
leaders. So any opportunity that I have, with Read USA, for example, I'll start there. It's really about bridging the literacy gap, right? We see so many of our children, Black children, who fall behind. Um, in the public school system, depending on where you are, there's not enough attention. And once you reach a certain threshold to where you can't read or you can't comprehend what you're reading, it's a trickle down effect. We've all heard of the school to prison pipeline, right? And it all starts with lack of education or a lack of attention to the needs of our children. So through Read USA, it gives me an opportunity to give back, not only through some of the tutoring programs that we offer as an organization, but the goal is to put books, quality books, like we implement school book fairs where kids go home with 3 books for free that they get to read, and they get books over the summer. So that actually like just uh, feeds my passion for literacy and making sure that children are ready to do the work that I'm doing. And similarly with Friends in Need Children's Center, it is based on creating opportunities for children to stay involved outside of school. So extracurricular activities, learning a skill, learning a trade, whether it's STEM, whether it's golfing, things that our children don't traditionally have access to if they don't have the money. How are we keeping them engaged and building their minds and getting them ready to be the next wave of the future?
Now, as you're talking, I can hear the passion. I had this question written down, but um, me wanting to know what keeps you passionate about the work you do. Um, is it seeing the accomplishments of everybody that you're helping? Is that the fuel that it gives you, or is it what is that?
That's a good question. I would say it's my belief that it's my responsibility to leave this world a little better than it was when I got here. Of course, I deserve a quality of life that includes rest, right? Because we don't rest enough. Black folks don't rest enough. Freedom and just, absence of being in fear simply because of the color of my skin. But I owe it to my children and generations to come to be part of that solution. So that's really what keeps me passionate, leaving this world a better place than it was when I got here.
Now I got one more question for you. It's kind of piggybacking off of one of the other questions that I asked you. But before, do you have any social media that you want to shout out to?
Yes, my Instagram is Mone_Holder, and my Twitter is the same, I
Okay.
think.
All right. Now, the final question, I like to ask all my guests this question because I like all the different answers I get. But with you and everything that you've learned and everything that you've gone through in your life, what is something that you've learned mentally and spiritually?
So keep God first, right? So I make time to, prayer is a very important part of my life. And even though I'm super busy and I always have things to do, when I feel like I'm tired, right? Or I'm too beaten down or I'm unclear about what I need to do next, that's the time that I know I need to take a minute and pray. So I know folks have different beliefs and different folks that they pray to and believe in, but my relationship with God has been the most important in this journey and will continue to be the most important for me as I do this work.
Yeah, so for me, I told you off camera that I want to highlight you guys, and listening to you throughout this interview, I I see that you're on path for your purpose. Everything that you speak about comes so naturally. You know what I mean? It's just it may seem hard to you in the moment of whatever that you're going through, but I can see that it's you make it look easy. You know what I mean? Because of the things
Thank you.
that you have such an understanding and you can tell that you study and you've been researching over the years. So continue to do what you're doing. You're on purpose, for all the things that you do. Just keep being who you are because God has something for you that's bigger than we'll ever imagine. So, you've like you said, earlier with your grandparents and your grandfather, everybody kind of not even knowing it, they just kind of laid a brick for you just to keep going. So, it's working.
Thank you.
I've
I
been looking at
appreciate that.
I've been looking at the plaque in the back. It's another word, but I say it says "We Rise." So just continue to keep doing what you're doing, and you're going to continue to rise. So Miss Mone Holder, I appreciate you for jumping on this podcast with me today.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
You're on YouTube, baby.